Some lives are remembered in headlines, others live on quietly in locker rooms and late-night songs, in scripts written behind the scenes and in worlds built for millions to explore. This is not a story about fame alone, it's about endurance. About people who showed up, stayed the course, and left their mark without asking for applause. From the grit of professional football to the soul of blues music, from television stories that challenged how we see justice, to digital worlds that reshaped modern entertainment, these are the lives that shaped moments, movements, and memories. Tonight, we remember for individuals whose journeys ended this season, but whose influence continues to echo long after the final whistle, the last note, the closing scene, and the final screen fade. A quiet stillness settled over the football world as the news quietly made its way through locker rooms and living rooms alike. On December 20, 2025, Richard Eugene McGeorge passed away, closing the chapter on a life shaped by discipline, grit, and a deep respect for the game he served for nearly a decade. There were no flashing headlines or dramatic announcements, just a moment of pause, and then reflection, as those who remembered him began to look back on what he gave. Richard McGeorge was born on September 14, 1948, in a time when football was still finding its modern identity. He grew up in an era where toughness mattered, where effort often spoke louder than fame. From an early age, he carried himself with quiet focus, the kind that didn't seek attention but earned it over time. Football was not just a sport to him, it was a responsibility. His path led him to Elan University, known then as the Elan Fighting Christians. It wasn't a powerhouse program, and it didn't offer the bright lights of major college football, but it gave McGeorge something just as valuable, a place to sharpen his work ethic and prove his reliability. Teammates would later recall how he showed up early, stayed late, and never asked for praise. He played the game the right way, with discipline and patience. That steady dedication did not go unnoticed. In 1970, McGeorge was selected in the first round of the NFL draft by the Green Bay Packers. It was a moment that changed his life, placing him into one of the most storied franchises in football history. The Packers were in a period of transition then, navigating the years after their legendary dominance. They needed players who could hold the line, who could bring consistency to a changing team. McGeorge became one of those players. As a tight end, his role was rarely glamorous. He was not known for flashy plays or highlight reel catches. Instead, he became known for something far more important: dependability. He blocked when needed. He caught passes when called upon. He absorbed hits without complaint and returned to the huddle ready for the next snap. In the 1970s, football was a different game. It was more physical, less protected, and far less forgiving. Tight ends were expected to do everything: block defensive linemen one play, run precise routes the next. McGeorge embraced that responsibility fully. Week after week, season after season, he showed up prepared, focused, and tough. Former teammates would later describe him as steady and unshakable. One former Packers lineman once said, "Richard wasn't loud, but you always knew he'd do his job. You trusted him." That trust, earned through consistency, is what kept him on the roster year after year. Across 9 seasons in the NFL, McGeorge carved out a career built on reliability. He wasn't chasing records or headlines. He was chasing excellence in the small moments: the clean block, the well-run route, the extra effort after contact. In a league that often celebrates stars, he represented the backbone of every successful team, the players who make everything else possible. Inside the locker room, McGeorge was respected for his professionalism. He didn't seek leadership roles, but his example spoke loudly. Younger players watched how he prepared, how he treated coaches, and how he carried himself after both wins and losses. There was no ego, no showmanship, just a quiet understanding of what it meant to be a professional. One former teammate later reflected, "Richard never needed the spotlight. He was the kind of guy who made everyone else better just by being there." It was a sentiment echoed by many who shared the field with him. Off the field, McGeorge lived much the same way he played. He valued privacy, family, and stability. Football was a chapter of his life, not the entirety of it. When his playing days came to an end, he stepped away with dignity, carrying the lessons of the game into the next phase of his life. His career coincided with the demanding era of football: before modern safety rules, before massive contracts, before social media attention. Players like McGeorge played for the love of the game and the pride of the team. They played hurt, they played tired, and they played on, often without recognition. That context makes his legacy all the more meaningful. When news of his passing spread in December 2025, the reaction was quiet but heartfelt. Former teammates, fans, and football historians shared memories not of flashy moments, but of reliability, of toughness, of a man who showed up every Sunday and gave everything he had. One fan wrote online, He may not be in the Hall of Fame, but he's in the history of this team forever. Another simply said, a true professional rests easy. These words capture the essence of Richard McGeorge's impact. He represented a generation of athletes who played for pride, not praise, who believed that doing the job right mattered. More than being noticed, his story reminds us that greatness doesn't always come with headlines. Sometimes it comes in the form of endurance, of quiet strength, of showing up again and again when the work is hard and the recognition is small. As the years pass, the statistics may fade and the footage may grow old, but the values he carried, discipline, humility, and commitment, remain timeless. They live on in the culture of the game and in the players who follow the same path. Richard Eugene McGeorge leaves behind more than a football career. He leaves behind an example, a reminder that not all heroes wear the spotlight, and not all legends are loud. In the end, his story is one of steady hands and strong resolve. A man who stood his ground in one of the toughest eras of professional football. A teammate who earned respect without asking for it. A player whose legacy lives quietly, but firmly, in the history of the game. And as a final whistle echoes on his journey, he is remembered not for what he demanded but for what he gave. The news came quietly, almost like a song fading out at the end of a long drive. On December 22nd, the world learned that Chris Ray had passed away at the age of 74. There were no sudden headlines or loud announcements, just a soft wave of reflection that moved through fans who had grown up with his voice. For many, it felt less like losing a star and more like saying goodbye to an old companion who had always been there in the background. Chris Ray's story was never about instant fame. It was about patience, persistence, and finding a sound that felt honest. Born in Middlesbrough, England, he grew up in a working-class family where music was not a given path. His early years were shaped by modest surroundings and quiet determination. He did not chase attention. Instead, he listened, learned, and slowly built a voice that would one day carry deep emotional weight. His journey into music was not easy. Early in his career, record labels struggled to understand him. His sound did not fit neatly into trends, and his personality did not match the image many executives wanted to sell. Creative pressure mounted, and at times his direction felt uncertain, yet those struggles would later become the foundation of his music. The restraint, the distance, and the quiet tension in his songs came from years of being told to change and choosing not to. Ray's breakthrough did not arrive with a single moment of fame. It came gradually, through songs that felt lived in, rather than produced. His voice stood apart from others of his generation. It was gravelly, worn, and deeply human. It carried the weight of long nights, long roads, and long thoughts when he sang. It never felt forced, it felt remembered. One of the defining elements of his music was his slide guitar. Simple, expressive, and emotional, it became his signature. He didn't use it to impress, he used it to speak. Each note lingered, often saying more in silence than in sound. Listeners felt that space, and they leaned into it. By the time songs like The Road to Hell reached audiences, Chris Ray had found his voice completely. The track wasn't just a hit, it was a reflection of the world as he saw it. Quietly critical, deeply thoughtful, and emotionally grounded, it spoke to movement, to struggle, and to the long journey people take just to find peace. For many fans, it became more than a song. It became a companion during late drives and quiet moments. Then there was Driving Home for Christmas. What began as a simple reflection turned into one of the most enduring seasonal songs in modern music. Unlike festive anthems filled with noise and cheer, Ray's version was gentle and real. It captured traffic lights, tired eyes, and the longing to simply get home. Over time, it became a tradition played year after year, not because it demanded attention, but because it felt honest. A fan once wrote online, "His songs don't shout, they sit with you." That sentiment echoed across generations. Chris Ray's music was never about spectacle. It was about connection. Despite his success in the UK and Europe, Ray's reach extended far beyond borders. He developed a strong international following, including in the United States, where his blues influence found a loyal audience. His albums sold steadily. His tours drew devoted crowds, and his reputation grew quietly. He was never flashy, never chasing trends. He simply stayed true to his sound behind the scenes. His life was marked by resilience. Ray faced serious health challenges over the years, including major surgeries that could have ended his career. But even then, he returned to music on his own terms. When he could no longer tour the way he once had, he focused on creating, painting, and recording from a place of reflection. His later work felt even more personal, shaped by experience and survival. Those close to him often described him as thoughtful and reserved. He valued privacy and avoided the spotlight whenever possible. One longtime collaborator once said, "Chris didn't chase fame, he chased truth in music." It was a simple statement, but one that captured him perfectly. As news of his passing spread, tributes began to appear across social media and music communities. Fans shared stories of road trips soundtracked by his songs. Others spoke of how his voice helped them through loneliness, heartbreak, or long nights of work. One message read, "His music felt like company when I had none." Another said, "He sang the way life feels." There was no shock in the announcement of his passing, only sadness mixed with gratitude. It felt in many ways like the final note of a long, meaningful song, gentle, unrushed, complete. Chris Rea leaves behind more than albums or chart success. He leaves behind a mood, a feeling, a way of listening to the world. His music taught people that it was okay to slow down, to reflect, to sit with emotion instead of running from it. He showed that strength could be quiet and that honesty could be powerful. His voice, worn and steady, will continue to travel long roads through speakers and headphones across the world. It will play in cars at dusk and kitchens during winter evenings and in moments when people need something familiar and true. In the end, Chris Rea's journey was never about the destination. It was about the road itself, the miles, the memories, and the meaning found along the way. And as his music continues to play on, so does his presence, a voice shaped by distance, a song carried by time, and a legacy that, like the road he sang about, never truly ends. A soft winter morning in Washington, D.C., carried with it the quiet news that Kevin Arcady had passed away on December 17, 2025. At the age of 68, there was no fanfare, no flashing headlines demanding attention, just the steady, reflective sorrow of those who understood the weight of his work. For viewers across the country, his stories had entered homes, shaping the way people understood law, morality, and human complexity, often without them knowing the hand behind it all. Born and raised in the nation's capital, Arcady grew up amidst the rhythms of politics, community, and urban life. He carried a natural curiosity about human behavior and a fascination with the stories that lay beneath the surface. Early on, he was drawn to writing, but not for applause or recognition. He wanted to capture truth, even when it was uncomfortable, even when it challenged conventional wisdom. His path led him into television during a period when the medium was evolving rapidly. He found his voice writing for series that would go on to define American drama. Shows like NYPD Blue, Chicago Hope, The Shield, and New York Undercover benefited from his insistence on realism and complexity. Where many writers simplify characters into heroes or villains, Arcady explored the gray areas of moral tension, the pressures, and the compromises that defined real human behavior. One former colleague remembered, "Kevin didn't write what was easy. He wrote what was true." That commitment shaped entire storylines, influencing not only the shows themselves, but the broader conversation about how television could reflect society. His scripts made viewers think, question, and empathize, presenting policing and medical practice as human work rather than pure drama. Even as his work reached millions, Arcady remained deeply collaborative. Writers, producers, and actors alike recalled his willingness to listen and refine, always focused on the story rather than his own profile. "He had no ego in the room," said another collaborator. "The story mattered more than anything else, and that's rare in this business." Over the years, his work earned recognition quietly but meaningfully. Emmy nominations and industry praise followed. But for Arcady, these were affirmations of integrity, rather than milestones of ambition. His reward was knowing that his stories were heard, felt, and remembered. Arcady's approach extended beyond narrative craft. He was passionate about diversity and authenticity, insisting that voices from varied backgrounds be represented honestly on screen. He understood that storytelling carried power and responsibility, and he wielded it carefully. Whether it was the young officer navigating ethical dilemmas or the patient on a hospital bed confronting mortality, Arcady's work honored humanity in all its complexity. Despite his professional achievements, those closest to him knew a man who was private and thoughtful. Family members described him as patient and attentive, someone who carried the same care into personal life that he did in his writing. One niece shared, "He listened, he really listened, and he made you feel that your story mattered." That quality, perhaps, was what translated so naturally into his scripts: empathy for characters, situations, and the people behind the headlines. When news of his passing reached the industry, tributes poured in quietly, each noting the void left by a storyteller who had always worked behind the scenes. A producer wrote, "Kevin shaped the way we think about narrative without ever asking for recognition." That's his true legacy. On social media, fans reflected on how his shows had changed their perception of morality, justice, and human resilience. Some writers changed television. One tweet read, "Kevin changed the way we see people." Arcady's impact is particularly felt in the depth of characters he helped bring to life. His work reminded viewers that every choice, every decision, is colored by circumstance, culture, and conscience. By refusing to flatten his characters, he elevated the medium itself. In doing so, he offered audiences not just entertainment, but inside windows into the lives of those whose experiences are often overlooked or misunderstood. In his absence, the stories he helped tell remain, carrying echoes of his voice and vision. They remind writers, producers, and viewers alike that influence does not always come from visibility. Sometimes it comes from dedication, from empathy, and from the courage to present the world honestly, no matter how complicated. Kevin Arcady leaves a legacy not of flash or notoriety, but of truth inscribed quietly into the scripts that shaped American television. His work continues to resonate in every nuanced character, every moral dilemma, and every story that refuses to settle for simplicity. And so, as the final credits roll on his remarkable life, what remains is the enduring power of his storytelling, a reminder that some of the most profound contributions occur not in the spotlight, but in the careful, thoughtful crafting of truth. His stories, like his life, were measured, deliberate, and meaningful, leaving behind a world slightly richer, slightly wiser, and forever touched by his insight. A quiet evening in Los Angeles was punctuated by the news that Vincent Zampella had passed away on December 21, 2025. The gaming world paused, not in spectacle but in reflection. Millions of players who had explored virtual worlds, led armies, and shared battles online suddenly felt the weight of a life dedicated to crafting the experiences they loved. His departure marked the end of a chapter in gaming history, but his creations continued to live, vibrant and unbroken. Vincent Zampella's journey began far from boardrooms and studios. As a young boy, he was captivated by the promise of interactive stories, spending hours immersed in early video games, imagining worlds that stretched beyond his bedroom walls. That passion evolved into a vision, one where players could not just observe stories, but step inside them, shape them, and live them. In 2002, alongside Jason West, Zampella co-founded Infinity Ward. The studio would go on to redefine modern gaming, most notably through the Call of Duty franchise. These games were more than entertainment, they were meticulously designed experiences that married narrative depth with technical precision. Players weren't just shooting targets, they were part of immersive worlds shaped with care and attention. Colleagues often recalled Zampella's insistence on detail. "Vincent never settled for good enough," said a longtime designer. "He pushed us to think, to create, to refine. But he also cared about people, the teams behind the screens." That balance between perfectionism and mentorship became a hallmark of his leadership. He believed in autonomy, giving his team space to innovate while guiding them toward a shared vision. His influence continued through Respawn Entertainment and Ripple Effect Studios. Here, Zampella fostered creativity, insisting that games remain both engaging and meaningful. He understood that technical mastery alone could not create lasting experiences. Storytelling, emotion, and immersion were equally vital. Peers remember him as a demanding yet fair leader, someone whose encouragement often matched his expectations. Zampella's impact reached beyond the studios he led. Millions of players around the globe learned to collaborate, strategize, and share experiences through the worlds he helped build. Online forums, tournaments, and community events became extensions of his vision, living proof that the worlds he created belonged to everyone. Fans tweeted, "We'll never forget the worlds you built for us, and your games connected us all, and that's forever." Even as the industry evolves, the foundations Zampella laid remain visible. Modern multiplayer games, cinematic storytelling, and interactive design continue to follow the paths he helped forge. Yet, for those who knew him personally, it was not just about the games. It was about the way he inspired others to think bigger, push further, and respect the craft of creation. Vincent Zampella's legacy is a reminder that worlds, virtual or otherwise, can outlive their creators. The soldiers, explorers, and adventurers who traverse his games carry forward a piece of his vision. Each mission completed, each story explored, and each connection made online is part of the life he shaped through discipline, passion, and insight. In remembering Zampella, the industry celebrates not just a visionary, but a guide. His dedication transformed gaming from pastime to cultural touchstone, connecting millions through shared adventure. And as players continue to log in, step into these worlds, and create memories within them, Vincent's influence endures, quiet, steadfast, and infinitely alive. His work reminds us that while creators may pass, the experiences they craft echo forever, binding players together and leaving a world forever richer for their imagination.